Now, from our Washington headquarters, here's David Brinkley.
Hard as it is to believe, the Israeli government will have a formal official meeting this coming week with leaders of the Palestinians, a meeting of two groups that have hated, fought, and killed each other for 40 years. They will meet and talk in Madrid, and oddly enough, under the auspices of the United States and the Soviet Union. It is indeed a new world. There are predictions that two Middle Eastern groups that still don't like each other will find it difficult or impossible to agree on anything serious, but it was a real achievement by the United States to get it organized at all. What might come out of it? We'll ask today's guests. The U.S. Secretary of State, James A. Baker, the Israeli Defense Minister, Moshe Arens, the leader of the Palestinian delegation, Haider Abdel-Shafi, and the original Middle Eastern shuttler, Henry Kissinger, our former Secretary of State. Our background report from Pierre Salinger in Madrid, and our discussion here with George Will, Sam Donaldson, and Cokie Roberts, here on our Sunday program. First, a little news since the Sunday morning papers. Kiichi Misawa was elected president of Japan's conservative ruling party, and he will be the new prime minister. Another Soviet republic, Turkmenia, declared itself independent. It's the 13th to go. The New York Times says federal investigators believe sources within the U.S. government tipped off drug dealers who then withdrew their money from the crooked bank BCCI. The Washington Post says U.S. intelligence agency found Israel shipped missile parts to South Africa in violation of an agreement. President Bush, it says, has declined to sanction Israel so as not to undermine the peace conference. And the World Series goes to a 7th game tonight in Minneapolis. The Twins center fielder Kirby Puckett hit a home run in the bottom of the 11th inning late last night, giving the Minnesota Twins a win over the Atlanta Braves. Finally, daylight saving time ended last night or this morning. We'll be back with all the rest of today's program in a moment.
This week with David Brinkley, brought to you by ADM, Supermarket to the World, and by GE. From plastics to financial services, we bring good things to life.
He was 50 when it happened. In 3 months, he went from perfect vision to almost total blindness. In test after test, doctors were at a loss. Finally, a test was done using GE's revolutionary magnetic resonance imager.
Look at this. Incredible.
The doctors discovered a tumor affecting his optic nerves, and he was treated. Within days, he got his vision back.
Hey, what a smile.
And everything that came with it.
Look what ADM research has cooked up. An all-vegetable patty that contains dietary fiber, is low in fat, and free of cholesterol. One that's made to meet the demands of vegetarians and other health-conscious consumers. It's the Midland Harvest brand Harvest Burger. And so far, it's made a big impression everywhere it's landed. ADM, Supermarket to the World.
If my count is correct, American officials have shuttled back and forth to the Middle East 32 times, trying to arrange a peace conference with the Israelis and the Palestinians. All failed. The last 8 shuttle trips were by Secretary of State Baker, and they are now paying off in the form of a peace conference next week. Beyond the fact that there will be a conference, nobody is sure of anything. While we await the results, ABC's chief foreign correspondent, Pierre Salinger, fills in some background details from Madrid. Pierre?
In forging this peace process, President Bush has been able to take advantage of changing conditions in the Middle East and in the world.
We're trying to be a catalyst to bring people together and let them talk about the differences. We're not having a conference about U.S. policy. We're having a conference about bringing people together to settle age-old disputes.
Bush created a strong Arab coalition to back his war against Iraq, including Syria, a country the United States had accused of sponsoring terrorism. Syrian President Hafez al-Assad understood he could no longer count on support from the crumbling Soviet Union and so he joined the U.S.-led alliance. And the Palestine Liberation Organization emerged from the Gulf War weakened and discredited after Arafat allied himself with Saddam Hussein. So will this peace conference succeed? This is the third time that Arab nations and Israel have met for official peace talks. The first one took place in 1949 here in Lausanne, Switzerland, when Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon met with the Jewish state. But that conference failed because the Arab nations refused to accept the existence of Israel. And Israel refused to withdraw from land it had won in the 1948 war. That stalemate lasted for almost 2 decades until 1967, when Israel, fearing an Arab attack, launched a preemptive war, which dealt a massive defeat to its Arab enemies and left Israel in possession of Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian territory. In October 1973, Egypt and Syria struck back, trying to regain their lands. Israel was caught by surprise, but recovered and destroyed much of the invading forces. In December of that year, Arabs and Jews met in Geneva. It was their second peace conference and their first face-to-face negotiations.
A problem that has defied solution for a generation does not yield to simple remedies.
Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who organized the 1973 conference, hoped it would end the Middle East conflict. Although the conference only lasted a day and a half, Kissinger began a shuttle diplomacy, traveling continuously between Israel, Egypt, and Syria. The result was a successful disengagement of forces along Israel's borders.
It was one of the most dangerous moments in post-war international history. And if it had failed, I shudder to think of what the consequences would have been.
Kissinger failed to produce a final settlement of the conflict. But Egyptian President Anwar Sadat emerged from the negotiations convinced that the only way to get Israel to return the Sinai Desert to Egypt was through diplomacy, not war.
Egypt had never seen, and Sadat certainly had never seen, the disengagement agreements as an end in themselves, but rather creating situations that made addressing the fundamental problem of peace between Egypt and Israel possible.
That led to Sadat's dramatic visit to Jerusalem in 1977, and the direct talks with Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and President Jimmy Carter that resulted in the 1979 Camp David peace treaty. Diplomacy paid off for Egypt. It got back to Sinai. Now Secretary of State James Baker has put Middle East diplomacy back on the table. ABC's national security correspondent, John McWethy.
From the perspective of the U.S., this is a monumental achievement, just getting these parties to the table. It's the first time that the Syrians and Israelis will be sitting down ever, the first time that the Palestinians will enter real negotiations with the Israelis. This does not mean that peace is at hand, however. The negotiations promise to be long and extremely difficult. U.S. officials point to 2 aspects of the negotiations which would be worth watching. One of those is the Israeli-Lebanese negotiations and the Israeli-Jordanian negotiations. If there's going to be progress at all, those 2 just might be where the progress is.
The opening of the conference next Wednesday will be more of a spectacle than a negotiating session. The real bargaining will go on 4 days later when a series of tough bilateral meetings begin. When Israel meets Syria, the key issues will be peace, security, and the Golan Heights. Israel and Lebanon. The issues will be preventing guerrilla attacks against Israel from Lebanese soil and discussion on Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Israel and the Palestinians, the most complicated meeting. The subjects, the status of the occupied territories, Israel's settlement program, and a possible offer of some form of local self-government for Palestinians. There are many pitfalls that could cause the conference to collapse at any moment.
Unfortunately, I do not see real reasons, objective reasons, logical reasons, rational reasons for really a breakthrough.
I don't think people should panic if within a week or so of this big event in Madrid, we discover that the parties are no longer talking to each other. It's in fact perhaps even predictable that one or another of these tracks is simply not going to get off the ground.
They didn't talk long in Geneva in 1973, but Henry Kissinger understood that the only way for Arabs and Israelis to overcome their pessimism was for the United States to exert continuous pressure on both sides. When the meeting opens this week here in Madrid, it will be a sign of how well the Bush administration has done in launching the peace process and how far it still has to go. David?
Pierre, thank you. And John McWethy? The attempt to arrange a peace conference between the Israelis and their various enemies in the Middle East has a long and difficult history and not any great success. The back and forth Middle Eastern shuttle in search of peace originated with Henry Kissinger when he was Secretary of State. He is here with us today. Mr. Kissinger, seeing as we do all the changes that have taken place in the world, what would you hope or what would you expect to see out of next week's meeting?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great achievement to assemble the conference, and Secretary Baker deserves enormous credit for his dedication in bringing it about. I expect the first phase of the conference to present basically incompatible positions. And I think it is very likely that a deadlock will develop, at least in some of the subgroups that are being formed. But that is when, in my view, the real negotiation will begin. And then the United States, playing the role of mediator, can try to bring the various parties together. I think we have to be open-minded to settle for something less than a complete agreement and to bring it along step by step.
Well, if the Israeli position remains no land for peace, there isn't much room for progress, is there?
Well, the Israeli position is no land for peace, and the Arab position is peace with nothing else, just the phrase of peace. And if those remain the positions, then there's no hope for progress. But on the other hand, in the Middle East, the opening of negotiations is usually a terrific occasion for rhetoric. And after that, one has to see whether anything more practical can be done. Israel has to give up some land. The Arabs have to give some content to peace. How much land, what the content for peace is, that, and who is willing to settle for less than everything in the first phase, that will be the subject of the subsequent negotiations after the formal positions are put down.
Mr. Kissinger, one of the Palestinian spokesmen said they would be happy to settle for, or be willing to settle, for some land adjoining Israel, but not in place of Israel. Does that offer some hope to you, you think?
Well, I don't know what they mean by adjoining.
Beside.
It depends what they mean by adjoining Israel. I have always believed that Israel cannot stay in possession of all the occupied territories. I also don't believe they can go back to the 67 borders. I believe that it is a big step if the Arabs offer peace, but they have to give a content to the word peace. I think there is hope. They wouldn't all be coming if they weren't at least willing, after a lot of rhetoric, to let us mediate between them. They will not be able to do it by themselves, and I don't think the direct talks, except for their symbolic quality, are going to get very far without American mediation.
Mr. Kissinger, the original Middle East shuttler, thank you very much for coming in today and giving us a bit of history on this. Thanks for coming. Coming next, Dr. Haider Abdel-Shafi, leader of the Palestinian delegation to the peace conference, and shortly, Moshe Arens, Defense Minister of Israel, and our Secretary of State, James A. Baker. In a moment.
Those figures for the meeting, you don't like them?
Some things are so reliable, they seem invisible.
Confusing, right? They're fine.
For the last 9 years, Canon has been the #1 choice for copiers of uncompromising quality.
No, really, tell me. You can tell me. They're fine. I'm your friend, tell me.
And if you haven't noticed, that's exactly how it should be.
We're not friends anymore.
From compact to advanced digital color to high-speed copying systems, the choice is Canon. Call 1-800-OK-CANON.
As Nancy Walsh saves for her son's education, her savings and those of millions like her are invested in business. When business grows, our nation prospers and becomes more competitive in the world, which could open up a world of opportunities. And who will be there seeking out those opportunities for you and Nancy Walsh? Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future.
It's Grand Central Station. It's Carnegie Hall. It's a late-night bistro and a banquet hall for 50. It's a GE Monogram kitchen. With GE Monogram appliances of such dramatic beauty and original style, they have no equal. So with Monogram appliances, your kitchen can be everything you ever dreamed it could be. Because you may call it a kitchen, but at GE, We know it's really your living room.
Every second of every day, there are 3 new mouths in this world to feed. Hundreds of millions more by the year 2000. And the majority of them will be born in countries where malnutrition is already reaching alarming proportions. Right now, the world has the food and the resources to conquer hunger. But it won't happen as long as we continue to look the other way. ADM, supermarket to the world.
When news matters, it matters where you get your news. For the first time in years, Arabs and Israelis will meet to talk peace. It starts Tuesday with a Bush-Gorbachev joint press conference. Peter Jennings will be there in Madrid, reporting what happens at the Middle East Peace Conference on ABC's World News Tonight this week.
Dr. Abdel-Shafi, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you. Now,
thank you.
Here in the studio with us are George Will and Sam Donaldson, both of ABC News. We're all glad to have you. Now, Dr. Abdel-Shafi, the Israelis want recognition and they want a peace treaty with their Arab Palestinian neighbors. What do you think the prospects are?
Well, as probably you know, the Palestinians have adopted a peace initiative in the meeting of the Palestine National Council in its 19th session, November 1988, where they have adopted a peace initiative based on the principle of the two-state solution as a basis for negotiations towards reaching a settlement. And I think the Palestinians are still committed to this peace initiative, which in essence recognizes the right of Israel to exist, only it remains for Israel to respond in the same or express its acceptance of the principle of the two-state solution as a basis for negotiations.
Doctor, today there are 2 states in the territory of the old Palestinian mandate. There's Jordan and there's Israel. And it has been traditionally United States policy that there should not be a 3rd state in the area of the old Palestine mandate. Are you saying that this traditional American policy is not compatible with the Palestinian position as they enter this peace negotiation?
Now, Palestine was always designated as the area west of the Jordan River. And we have been struggling all through since during the mandate and up till now for recognition of our right of self-determination. So if the Americans deny us this, I think this is not fair. And Jordan is another state by itself. So our request, in my opinion, remains valid.
Doctor, Resolution 242, which is part of the basis of this peace conference, does not require that Israel withdraw from all territories or the territories taken in the '67 war, but just territories. Israel says that it has withdrawn now, and unquestionably has withdrawn now, from 90% of the territories it occupied in the '67 war. How much more withdrawal do you think is necessary? And do you think Israel ever again will go back to borders in which it was only 10 miles wide?
Well, I don't have to respond to whether it was 10 miles wide or not, but I think Israel has occupied these territories in 1967 in a manner of aggression. And aside from the stipulation of the 242, talking about withdrawal from occupied land, still the first phrase, which is inadmissible to acquire territory by force. Now I presume that this withdrawal should be almost total from all the occupied territories, and the argument that the withdrawal from Sinai would be enough, or it is substantial. Well, Sinai is one thing and Palestine is something else. However, if Israel...
Go ahead.
However, if Israel, sticks to this point, well, let us put it on the negotiating table.
And Dr. Shafi, you were quoted this weekend as saying that in the next few days, if the time comes when you think it appropriate to declare publicly your support for the principles of the PLO organization, Yasser Arafat's organization, you will do so. What did you mean by that? And what is your association with the PLO?
Well, I can tell you that I am like any other Palestinians. We have our allegiance is to our legitimate leadership, which is the PLO. We are not officials of the PLO, but certainly, as everybody knows, there is an overwhelming support for the PLO as a legitimate leadership by all the Palestinian people.
Well,
is there anything?
Well, I was going to ask you about a
wrong with this?
I was going to ask you about a specific member of your delegation, Saeed Erekat. Israel has said that Israel will not come to the table if he is still a member of the delegation because he has said publicly that the delegation was selected by and represents the PLO. Do you think Erekat should remain a member of your delegation? Do you expect him to be in Madrid?
Well, really, here I must discuss this a little bit. Now, Israel objects to dealing or to having anybody in the delegation from the PLO. What does this mean? Does it mean that Israel knows that there is an overwhelming support among the Palestinians for the PLO. Then the request of Israel must be explained in this context. Are they refusing to talk to officials of the PLO, or are they, on the other hand, refusing to talk to all Palestinian people in their state of allegiance to the PLO? I know that Mr. Erekat is not an official of the PLO. He is an ordinary Palestinian. And so I don't think that the Israeli argument holds on here. I can concede that probably he was a little provocative in what he said, but still, all the same, I think Israel must explain its position. Either she wants to talk to Palestinians or she does not want to talk to Palestinians.
Well, I suppose I'm asking whether you see this as an ultimate obstacle to sitting down next Wednesday in Madrid. Do you believe that Erekat will be a member of your delegation, and do you also believe that Israel will be present?
Well, really, I don't think, as long as Erekat is nominated to be a member of the delegation with the approval of the gentlemen, Mr. Husseini and Hanan Ashrawi, who were talking so long with Mr. Baker, I don't think it is fair to exclude him just because he was a little provocative in what he said. But the way I explain it, I think really leaves no reason why should Erekat be out. However, any Palestinian who can be nominated will represent the views of the Palestinians.
George, we have a few seconds.
Sir?
We don't. Sorry, satellite's gone. We're finished. Dr. Abdel-Shafi, if you can hear me, thank you very much. Pleased to have you with us.
Thank you.
Giving us your views on this subject. Coming next, Moshe Arens, Defense Minister of Israel from Tel Aviv, and shortly, our own Secretary of State, James A. Baker. In a moment.
In the midst of the storm, it's only natural to wonder where the future will lead. To people who worry about the winds of change today, we'd like to remind you that no adversity lasts forever. And we'll be there with the strength and resources you can count on. Because at Merrill Lynch, we're bullish on the future.
Imagine your refrigerator with bigger door shelves for bigger bottles, with leftovers left in quick-serve trays for leftover space, more space, nearly 27 cubic feet, and a door in the door for things you use more. Imagine GE's Space Center 27.
This Week with David Brinkley will continue in a moment.
Tonight, a single drop of blood can lead him to you.
Got the key!
Go face to face with the Great White. ABC's World of Discovery. Shark Chronicles tonight.
You'll save every day on the brand names you know at Menards. Add more life to your car with Haviland Formula 3 motor oil. Choose 10W30 or 10W40. Now just 79 cents per quart after mail-in rebate. And seal out drafts with 3M insulator kits. They're easy to install and shrink to a clear as glass fit. Indoor window kits start at just $2.87. Discover brand name savings at Menards.
Save big money at Menards.
Harding, old money. Nice guy. Bogosian, pharmaceuticals, shoots in the low 80s. That's Vanderpool, oil, good backhand.
Who's that?
Turpin, bazillionaire.
What's he like?
He's smart.
Stop by Betts Lexus Des Moines and see how smart driving an LS400 can be.
You're watching Channel 5.
Mr. Arens, thank you very much for coming in today.
It's nice to be with you, especially under these auspicious circumstances.
Well, we certainly hope they turn out to be auspicious, and again, we thank you. Now, Israel's, your country's position in relation to the Palestinians has been well known for quite a long time, and I don't ask you to give away your bargaining position in advance, but as you go into these meetings, do you have anything new to offer? Anything new that you can tell us about?
Well, actually, David, I think that amongst the various rounds of negotiations that will be taking place, the negotiations with the Jordanian-Palestinian delegation probably have the greatest promise of bringing some agreement in the immediate future. And this is because it has been agreed that these negotiations will be based on two phases. The first phase being connected with the Camp David agreements, namely the establishment of a self-governing authority. That having already been agreed, I think there's a good chance that we will be able to flesh out that authority and not leave any specific problems that will disturb the relationship between Israel and Jordan.
Well, you sound very hopeful and optimistic.
Well, I
right?
think on that score, yes, on that score, I think that's going to be relatively easy, not easy, relatively easy. According to the Camp David agreements, the negotiations on the permanent settlement will be held after 3 years of self-governing authority. That's going to be a great deal more difficult, but hopefully in 3 years, maybe many things will happen that will remove anxieties and differences of opinion.
Very good.
Mr. Arens, the preceding guest representing the Palestinian position spoke of the two-state solution. Is it your understanding that the two-state solution is incompatible with or compatible with traditional U.S. policy regarding the final solution here of the dispute in the old Palestine mandate?
I think, to the best of my knowledge, that it is incompatible with the traditional U.S. position. But as I said, in the first round, when discussions will be held on the self-governing authority, I think the question won't come up, or really shouldn't come up.
It is said repeatedly that Resolution 242 is the primary basis of this peace conference. It speaks of withdrawal from territories, not all territories, not the territories. As I asked in the previous segment, what does Israel think remains to be done for Israel to comply with Resolution 242, given the extent of withdrawals already from territories occupied in '67?
You know, the Resolution 242 talks about withdrawal from territories and not the territories. That was a subject that was discussed at the time, and the absence of the word the is quite deliberate and not accidental. And it also talks about secure and recognized boundaries for the State of Israel. I think that is something that needs to be understood by all the parties to the negotiation. Israel is surrounded by hostile states, has had to fight 5 wars in its defense in the past 43 years. There are neighbors on the periphery like Iraq, Iran, Libya, who refused to join the peace process, who threatened Israel. The foreign minister of Iran just the other day said that Israel must be destroyed. So I think under the best of circumstances, it must be recognized that Israel will continue to have security problems and must have the kind of borders that can be defended.
Mr. Arens, let me ask you the Israeli view of Saeed Erekat, this member of the Palestinian-Jordanian delegation. Is it your view that he must be excluded, otherwise you will not be in Madrid?
I think there's a deliberate attempt here to scuttle the negotiations. Why make things difficult when with a little effort you can make them impossible? It was agreed that the Palestinian section of the Jordanian Palestinian delegation would not represent the PLO, would not be appointed by the PLO. And this particular gentleman, if we can call him that, of course, is trying to throw a monkey wrench into the works, and we'll see how we'll handle that.
Well, our previous guest, who is the leader of the delegation, said that he thought Erekat may have spoken a little out of school, or he may have been a little too outspoken. If Erekat simply withdraws his comments, will he then be acceptable to be a member of the delegation?
I don't know that it would be appropriate for me to make that kind of a deal with you on television. It is a problem. I was glad to hear Dr. Abdel-Shafi say that it was a provocative statement, namely he spoke out of turn, and so maybe the situation can be settled to everybody's satisfaction.
Mr. Minister, you have said recently that you do not believe the United States has been absolutely even-handed in its approach to this problem. Did you mean that? What did you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that I find it difficult to accept that the United States would take an even-handed position when negotiations are held between Israel, the only democracy in the area, the United States being the leader of the democratic community of nations, and countries run by totalitarian rulers that have time and again attacked Israel. I think it obviously should be a situation where the United States has more sympathy for this little democracy than for some of these other dictators.
So your point is, I take it, that you don't expect you did not want the United States to be even-handed, and I take it you think then the United States has not been.
I would be disappointed if it was just even-handed, but I have to add immediately that the continuous pronouncements from Washington that the negotiations have to be based on territories for peace, that there must be an end to the occupation, that settlements are an obstacle to peace, they are interpreted in the Arab world as a U.S. position that all of the territories that the Arabs lost in aggression against Israel will be retrieved and that the United States will help them retrieve them. And that, I think, is raising expectations that are not helpful for the negotiations that are coming up in Madrid.
Mr. Arens, thank you. Thank you very much for coming in to talk with us. And needless to say, we hope the meeting goes well. Coming next, the U.S. Secretary of State, James A. Baker, in a moment.
At first, it doesn't seem to be much of a problem. A tire here, a tire there. But it all adds up to the point where Americans dispose of more than 250 million tires a year. But at the Archer Daniels Midland Company, we're doing something about it. We're taking tires that would ordinarily be an environmental problem. We're shredding them and mixing them with coal to create a fuel that burns cleaner in our power plant, providing the energy we need to produce ethanol, a gasoline additive derived from surplus cornstarch that helps reduce carbon monoxide emissions by up to 25%. So as you can see, by using a little ingenuity, we at ADM have got yet another good idea rolling. ADM, supermarket to the world.
The road your business travels is changing at breakneck speed, but you can take advantage of change to be more competitive with computing and communication services from EDS. EDS focuses technology on business goals, creates ways to improve quality and save time, makes it all work together. We can even help you manage it. You can't control change, but you can take advantage of change with EDS.
At GE, we just had an idea that could help eliminate pollution from the atmosphere. An idea that could save power plants 3 million tons of coal a year and 1 million barrels of oil. Introducing GE's Energy Choice lights. If we all changed to these lights, we'd save our resources, and you'd save enough on your electric bill to all but pay for the bulbs. New GE Energy Choice. No wonder the light bulb is the symbol for a brilliant idea.
Golf's top guns battle it out in a high-stakes shot-making showdown. 10 begin, but only one will win the Merrill Lynch Shootout. Today on ABC Sports.
This nightmare is trying to give Kansas City a green season, but the Raiders are out to sound the alarm. They meet on ABC's Monday Night Football.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for coming.
Thank you, David.
Glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Now, you went to the Middle East round trip 7 times, and so far as we know, not a great deal happened. On the 8th time, you got this peace conference organized. What happened?
Well, I think things were happening during the course of the first 7
But you didn't tell us about it.
trips. Well, but there was, for instance, an announcement after one of those trips, or a couple of those trips, to the effect generally that some Arab countries said they would attend under certain circumstances. An announcement that I think represented a rather significant change in what had been their attitude toward willingness to sit down with Israel and talk peace. So I think that's one of the first things that happened. Then we were able, during the course of those visits, to work out agreements with the government of Israel and others respecting the standards for representation of Palestinians, which had been something that had prevented the parties from getting together in the past. And so I don't think it was only the last trip that made headway.
As I understand the ancient history of the argument about the settlements, the Carter administration said settlements are illegal. The Reagan administration said they're not illegal, but they're an obstacle to peace.
Yeah, that's right.
Answer me this. Do Jews have less of a right to live in the West Bank than they do in Haifa, and if so, why?
I won't answer that question because that gets into the legalistics and philosophy of what our policy position is or should be towards settlements. I will say to you that it has been the consistent policy of this administration that settlements are an obstacle to peace, and we have declined to adopt the formulation, go back to the formulation that was expressed during the Carter administration that they were illegal. It would not be helpful for me to hypothesize with you here this morning on this program 24 hours in advance of our leaving for the peace conference with respect to questions like that, so I hope you'll understand why I declined.
We don't want you to be helpful. We want you to be newsworthy.
I know you do.
Press on here. I know that it is the administration position that military technologies have changed and the situation in the Middle East changed because of Desert Storm and all the rest, and therefore territory and peace may not be linked as they traditionally have been thought to be linked. That said, can you imagine a settlement in which Israel is once again 11 miles wide or 10 miles wide at its narrowest point?
Another thing I'm not going to do, George, is take a position with respect to borders or take a position with respect to exactly what 242 requires. Throughout this process, we have made it clear that the terms of reference for this conference and really for the bilateral negotiations that are going to follow, hopefully, are a comprehensive settlement of the Arab-Israeli conflict on the basis of 242. There are differing interpretations of 242. The parties will come to the table with those differing interpretations. They revolve around the questions that have been broached here in questions to prior guests on the program. All the territory, the territory. The position of the United States is simply 242, territory for peace, and we're going to leave it right there. One of the agreements that we've made with all of the countries is we will not change U.S. policy in order to get people to the table. Okay. And throughout very long negotiations with the parties on letters of assurance, we have declined specific requests from almost every one of these parties to change U.S. policy positions.
Okay, it has been U.S. policy in the past that there are now 2 states in the basic Palestine Mandate territory and that a 3rd state is not required and not advisable. Is that still?
It continues to be U.S. policy that we do not support an independent Palestinian state.
It is reported by the Washington Post this morning that the Bush administration has declined to follow the law and impose sanctions on Israel because Israel in the last year shipped missile parts to South Africa. Is that correct?
We obviously have not declined to follow the law. We have been very careful to follow the law, and we have been working with Israel and other states on matters involving the export of missile technology. We're going to continue to work with them. I'm not going to get into here, Sam, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I can't get into specific discussion of matters which are classified, and these are classified issues.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I'm not talking about matters of the conference. I'm talking about U.S. law. If it is your position that that is not the law, the Defense Act does not say that, then I'll stand corrected, and we'll take a look at it. But I want to know whether the Bush administration is going to make any effort to sanction Israel because of this past sale of missile technology to South Africa.
I'm not going to comment on the story this morning in the Post, because to do so would get me into making comments with respect to classified information that I'm simply not willing to do. Let me assure you that we are following the law very, very specifically in this matter.
Mr. Secretary, let me then ask you to comment on this business about Saeed Erekat, a member of the Palestinian Jordanian delegation, and as to whether you think he ought to remain a member of that delegation or whether you think he ought to withdraw because of Israel's objection.
We were disturbed by the comment. I was glad to see the head of the Palestinian side of the joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation say on this program a few minutes ago that he thought it was provocative, because we certainly thought it was provocative. And we think that it goes outside the bounds of the standards that we have negotiated and agreed upon with the parties. So we're disappointed, and I will leave it right there.
Well, may I just press one more?
Go ahead.
Time. You say it's provocative. Provocative enough in your judgment?
I didn't say it was provocative. I said that the head of the Palestinian delegation said it was provocative, which is a statement that we agree with.
All right, you didn't say it was provocative, but you agree with the statement it was provocative. Therefore, was it provocative enough for him to have to withdraw from this delegation, or with the withdrawal of the statement perhaps would be enough?
I've just said I think we ought to leave it right there.
Mr. Secretary, you were instrumental, to say the least, in organizing, getting this conference together. What is your role? What's our country's role going to be once it starts?
Our role, David, should be that of a catalyst for peace. We ought to do whatever we can to try and move these discussions forward, to promote progress. We should serve as an honest broker, something, frankly, that the Prime Minister of Israel asked us to do, and something that is incorporated in the documents that have been
You're going to join in the discussions and
agreed to. We will only participate in the bilateral discussions if we are asked by both parties. But we will be available if we are asked, and we would, together with the other co-sponsors, serve as the driving force to keep to try and move forward toward progress. Having said all that, I think we ought to. I noticed some of the commentators at the beginning of the program recognized the fact, and I think we should recognize the fact, that there are going to be interruptions. There are going to be glitches. There are going to be a lot of hitches here. And we should not go into this conference thinking that this 2.5 to 3 days is going to produce peace in the Middle East. I was glad to see Moshe Arens say what he said about prospects for progress with respect to the talks between Israel and the joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation on interim self-government arrangements. But I think we ought to make sure we understand this is the Middle East. It's been hard enough to get them to agree to talk. Now we have to recognize we have a difficult path in front of us in order to see progress. But one final comment, George, and then I'd be glad to take another question from you. But I think that talks don't guarantee peace, but without talks, it's pretty certain that we're not going to make progress toward peace. So I hope here we're taking a necessary first step in order to at least make some progress toward peace.
Two questions about the larger frame of this. First of all, what has Gorbachev got to do with this? He doesn't even have a country anymore. Why is it important for him to be involved?
Well, it's important, I think, because the invitation was initially issued by President Gorbachev and President Bush. I don't think that would have been productive for us, frankly, to take the position that having had that happen, we should somehow take the position the Soviets should be ejected from the process. And let me say further, the Soviets have been very helpful. The change in the East-West confrontation has been one of the things I think that's enabled us to see the parties come together or be willing to come together. Soviets have been helpful with some of the Arab states that used to be their client states. They've been helpful with Palestinians. So they've contributed.
The enormous investment of your time and the President's time in this settlement of basically the West Bank and the Israeli-Palestinian dispute suggests, in a way that's peculiar to some people, that this is a vital American interest. There were two huge wars in the Middle East in the 1980s. Neither had anything to do with Israel and the Palestinians. Few of the conflicts in the Middle East in the last 50 years have. Why is this so important that we have to put all this pressure on Israel to try and solve this? What great national interest is implicated here?
I think with the end of the East-West confrontation, with the emergence of the United States as the preeminent power, if you will, it is incumbent upon us to at least continue what we've been trying to do for a long, long time, and that is to promote peace.
Is this altruism, or is there...
Well, it is important for and to our strong ally Israel. It is important in terms of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. This is a tinderbox now of the world, if you will, in terms of the weapons that have been accumulated by the powers by the states of the Middle East.
Syria has lots of those weapons.
Yes, they do.
Chemical weapons, long-range missiles now from North Korea and elsewhere.
Yes, they do.
Shouldn't Israel be petrified of our new friend Syria?
I don't know that they should be any more petrified than they have been, but there's no change in our position with respect to Syria. We have not changed anything, but we have been willing to talk to Syria about getting a peace process going. And when people suggest to me that we should not even have had those discussions, which have involved the peace process, I think that that's very short-sighted.
Mr. Secretary,
you're not going to get peace unless the parties are willing to talk, and you're not going to get talks unless you get all the
Mr. Secretary, you heard Defense Minister...
A few seconds, Sam.
Thank you, David. Mr. Secretary, we heard Defense Minister Arens complain that the United States should be even-handed and should not be even-handed, should tilt toward Israel, and complain about a whole series of things, including the U.S. position on the settlements, that he said were not helpful. What's your response to that?
Well, my response is that it was the Israeli government that asked us to assume the role of honest broker. It was their term, their suggestion.
Do you think we should be an honest broker? That is, do you think we should be even-handed?
I think that we should be an honest broker in this process and do everything we can to promote peace and to help bring the parties together and to help bridge gaps where we can.
Should we be even-handed?
We should not put our own proposal on the table. And we haven't, but we ought to try and promote peace.
Why can't you answer the basic question as to whether we should be even-handed?
We've run out of time, Sam. We've run out of time.
Yes, we should.
Secretary.
We should. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you,
Pleasure
David.
to have you. Good luck next week. Coming next, our discussion here, and joining us will be Cokie Roberts of ABC News in a moment.
Centuries, mankind has looked to the heavens for the extraordinary. Starting November 1st, it can again, in the friendly skies. Introducing Connoisseur Class, only on United. A truly elevated form of international business class. Come fly the airline that's uniting the world. Come fly the friendly skies.
National Bank is closed for the holiday.
This is Dr. Martell. We are closed until tomorrow.
Due to record snowfall, all town services will be closed.
You have reached Lucci Plumbing. I am indisposed at the moment.
We wish you a Merry Christmas, but we are not here.
Ever try to get help on a holiday or even a weekend? It's nearly impossible. Unless, of course, you're calling one very special number.
GE Answer Center may help you.
365 days a year, 24 hours a day, GE's Answer Center is there to help. Whether you're thinking of buying a GE appliance or already own one.
My son just put marbles in the ice maker.
Don't worry, ma'am.
Now, weekends, holidays, or darkness of night, the GE Answer Center never closes.
GE Answer Center, happy holidays.
You're open. I can't believe it.
We're always here. How can I help you?
Bring good things to life.
Risk. As hard as it is to live with, it's impossible to live without. At Merrill Lynch, we know that risk can be dealt with. It can be managed. It can even be turned to your advantage. To do that, you need a partner. A partner who understands it and can help you turn a world of risk into a world of opportunity. Merrill Lynch, we're bullish on the future.
Thursday, we take hidden cameras into phony abortion clinics. Women seeking abortions instead walk into a trap set by those against it. Prime time.
Thursday.
She comes home from work and begins her second job. He comes home from work and does this. Working couples collide over sharing the workload. Watch 2020, Friday.
The recession was said to be over some months ago, but clearly it is not. It hangs on, and hangs on. We are told that there is some concern at the White House about this, and the thought that it might make it more difficult for Mr. Bush's re-election. What do you think, George?
Well, obviously, the economy is what people vote on. The bread and butter issue is the cost and availability of bread and butter. And there was a poll last week that showed the president's re-elect number, that is, the portion of the population inclined to vote to re-elect the president, as against an unknown Democrat, was down to 47%. Trouble is, once the Democrats name someone, their support usually goes down. And a hypothetical Democrat's better than an actual Democrat these days. Still, they have grounds to be worried, not just because we're in a recession, and not just because the recession has a weak recovery, or might even go into a double-dip recovery, but because for 15, 18 years now, the economy has been performing well below historical norms, and the country's beginning to feel the pressure.
George, you're exactly right. We did not, unfortunately, grow our way out of the budget deficits. Supply-side economics didn't do it, and we're in a heck of a pickle. I think the president's in a heck of a pickle now because the recession is clearly going to linger on into next year, and it shows at the moment no signs of recovery. People will vote against him on that ground. And I think Mario Cuomo will come forward. All the Democrats will come out of the woodwork. And even though you're correct, their mere presence will sort of even the field.
Well, but
George Bush is the one who doesn't have a policy that's going to take the country out of
Sam,
recession.
what is the Democratic policy? The voters who are asked whether they approve of the president's handling of the economy say no.
President?
But then they're asked about the Democratic Party, and they don't have any confidence in the Democrats either, or the Democrats in Congress, or any of the rest of it. And part of what they are that's what the polling shows.
The polls show that most voters think that the Democrats can do a better job on the economy than the Republicans.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
Well, we have a fundamental problem here.
The other thing is that what you talk about supply-side economics, the big cure that is now being recommended by Democrats is tax cuts. And they are saying middle-income tax cuts, that kind of thing. It's just more of the same.
Well, the problem with that is that we have, at the moment, a policy that's simply monetary. We look to the Federal Reserve. Alan Greenspan, if you're out there, you've cut the rates 4 times. We want you to do it 5th time, a 6th time. But that's not enough. He's the Fed chairman. That's not enough. And I don't see any effort on the part of either the president or, you're right, the Democrats on the Hill to come up with a comprehensive fiscal policy that breaks the old budget agreement and that puts some fiscal impetus behind a recovery.
George, you...
Go ahead.
Go ahead, George. You've said 15, 18 years the economy has performed poorly, below normal. Why is that?
Well, a lot of reasons, but basically, I mean, we're being litigated to death by a plague of lawyers. We have schools that aren't producing people who can increase our productivity. Because of the deficit, we're sopping up through public borrowing and an unconscionable portion of our savings pool.
And we've had companies that have overpaid its executives and not kept it.
There are lots of reasons. If it's ever paid off,
you're right.
It's by the working people of this country.
Because you and I got one heck of a tax cut beginning in 81 and then again in 86.
Can I ask Sam?
And we have prospered, but the deficit has not. It has grown.
Can I ask Sam
cut from a tax rate that was criminal to begin with. 70%.
No, 50%.
70%, Sam.
But this predated that. It
income,
predated this tax cut, this problem in the economy. The fact is that middle-income Americans are barely keeping pace with what they were making 15, 20 years ago. And the only reason they're keeping pace is because women went into the workforce in such numbers that family income can be the same as it was 20 years ago with only one member of the family working.
I'm for women in the workforce.
Sam, the question is how much is enough? Today, the federal spending as a percentage of gross national product is about 25%. That's an all-time peacetime record. How much is enough? The American people say, look, taxes, federal taxes, as a share of GNP are higher under George Bush than under
Well,
Jimmy Carter.
look,
How much is enough?
What have we been spending it on, George?
The politics of it are that people still want to cut taxes, and people still want to spend money. So the politics are clear.
But
and
Cokie,
both parties are having trouble figuring out the politics of this middle income question, which is why the whole civil rights question has become such a difficult question, because that's also part of the whole middle class
We can't continue to do that. We can't build a B-2. We can't spend on Star Wars. We can't do all of this expenditure and at the same time ever get out of the budget deficit.
Well, I wouldn't say that Mario Cuomo is in the woodwork, since that term has been used here, but if he comes out from the governor's office, New York governor's office, to run for president, would you be surprised, George, and could he win?
I don't think, if you look at where he stands right now, and there are polls in various states, he's being trounced handily by George Bush in Wisconsin, California, and elsewhere. But that's hypothetical. Let's see how well he wears and how much the country loathes and detests New York and how much they associate him with New York.
I think he will run.
I think, is the answer.
But also, he needs to make a decision one way or the other, because he's frozen the process
Well,
at the
that's
moment.
clearly what's happened. Is that the
and
calendar,
the Democrats who are running can't really run with this specter of Cuomo. It's the way Kennedy used to be over all of the Democratic
and then
candidates.
Kennedy got in, and it turned out to be a mirage.
And that's exactly what should happen with Cuomo.
I want to get one more thing before the time runs out, and it's not long. President Bush attacked Congress a day before yesterday in terms so angry that they're seldom heard out of any president. So what? He's going to run for re-election against the Congress? Is that it?
So Harry Truman ran against the do-nothing 80th Congress.
And he won.
And won. But this Congress is not in the same boat. I think Cuomo will get in the race. I think he'll do well, but only insofar as any Democrat does well next year against the George Bush who's either eaten up by recession or a recovery is underway. I think running against Congress is not going to get him the votes.
Well, the problem is that people either want change or they don't want change. And if they want change, they want it all the way down the line. And that's tough for a divided government, because then they might want change in the White House and the Congress.
Maybe they want change and for everything to stay the same. George, you want the last word? We've got a few seconds.
Go Twins.
What?
Go Twins.
Is that a football team?
No, Sam.
We've got 30 seconds. Sam, you want to finish this off?
Well, I don't know anything about baseball.
No, it's not. We weren't talking about that.
Let's go,
well, the Twins are not the Twins
George
deficit.
talked about
let me go back to your question, which is a fair one. Can you run against Congress? I think if you run against Congress, which the Democrats are identified with good reason, and you run in favor of term limits, 75% of the country or so wants term limits now, you've got a winning,
you got 10 seconds.
A winning argument.
George Bush,
you got 10 seconds.
Insider running against
Thank you all. Thank you all until next week. Thanks for being with us.
This Week with David Brinkley, brought to you by Merrill Lynch. We're bullish on the future. And by GE. From satellites to medical systems, we bring good things to life. If you wish a transcript, send $5 to This Week with David Brinkley, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203.
This Week with David Brinkley is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
Monday, detecting and treating anorexia and other eating disorders. Also what men expect from marriage.
Plus Baby Talk Scott Baio on Good Morning America Monday.
Neil Patrick Harris. He was the all-American boy.
Amnesia.
Till an accident made him an infant.
He doesn't even know where he is.
A stranger in the family Sunday.
Where can you hear great country music from artists like Reba McEntire, Garth Brooks, and George Strait, and win thousands and thousands of dollars? Only on KJJY. Listen this week for a chance to win this dream truck from Mid-States Ford, Channel 5, and 92.5 KJJY. Watch the 10 o'clock news tonight on Channel 5. Then listen to Hatfield and McCoy tomorrow morning at 7:15. We'll tell you how to be a winner with country music, Channel 5, and 92.5 KJJY.
Iowa has its own tales of terror. Starting Tuesday at 10,
Channel 5's Pauletta Longo will expose the facts behind 2 haunting Iowa ghost stories. Throughout the years, these legendary hauntings have spooked generations of Iowans. Now the time has come to tell the tale. Iowa's Ghost Stories, Tuesday on the Channel 5 News.